All right, I think we can begin. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Feldman. I'm the Director of Water UCI, and I want to welcome you to our panel this evening, which is called Local Nonprofits Discuss the Future of Water in Southern California. Before I introduce our distinguished panelists and tell you a little bit about the logistics for this evening, I first want to take this opportunity to introduce Nick Fedoroff, who's going to say a few things to you.
Thank you, Dave. Hi, everybody. How you doing? Good. All right. Well, thank you for coming out tonight. I want to thank Dave for inviting us to come out here. I host a television show called Things Green on PBS. It's a 6-day-a-week television show. If you want information about it, we will give you that a little bit later. Just want to let you know we are filming tonight, okay? So be careful where you scratch. All right, that's real important. That's number one. Anybody with a big beard is allowed on TV, I'll tell you right now. Actually, we're going to get the backs of your heads, so it's really no big deal there. We may end up taking the cameras out when for the refreshments and stuff like that. There was a sign that when you walked in that said that we're going to be filming here, so I just want to let you know about that as well. No need to be intimidated or anything like that. Just kind of wanted to give you a heads up on that. So there's no problem if you've got to get up and go to the restroom and that kind of thing. We're using 10,000 cameras over here to get the job done, and this show is going to. How are we going to do that? How can we let people know that they can see the backs of their heads on TV?
I guess now they know.
Yeah, you know what? Just check with our website when it comes up. That's the best way to do that, and we have a calendar on there. And then we're actually filming today for the spring of 2017. So that's how kind of far ahead that we do this kind of stuff. It's that important to bring this subject matter to the table. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nick. This is really exciting for Water UCI, for the university, and for the topic at hand this evening. Non-governmental actors, as many of you know, are major players in the creation and the production up and downstream of water management, and that is nowhere more true than here in Southern California. This panel discussion brings together a group of representatives representing diverse organizations from the region to talk about the future of water in Southern California. Let me introduce our distinguished panelists, and I'm going to go from my immediate right to the end of the table. I first want to introduce Mariela Magana. Mariela is currently the sole policy advocate for Leadership Counsel in the Eastern Coachella Valley. Originally from the Eastern Coachella Valley, her work focuses on advocating for the unique needs of unincorporated communities, including access to safe drinking water and transportation equity. To Mariela's immediate right is Michael Cohen, who is a senior research associate at the Pacific Institute. He was formerly a member of the Bureau of Reclamation's Moving Forward Municipal and Industrial Water Conservation and Reuse Work Group, and participated actively in the development of the 2012 Colorado River Basin Study. To Michael's right is Kim Delfino. Kim is the California Program Director for Defenders of Wildlife, and in that capacity, she oversees the work of Defenders California Program Team in protecting and restoring California's imperiled wildlife and the places in which they live. Next is Garry Brown. Garry is the President, Chief Executive Officer, and founder of Orange County Coastkeeper, a nonprofit organization focused on education, restoration, advocacy, research, and enforcement. And last but not least, Melanie Winter, who is the founder of the River Project, a nonprofit dedicated to watershed-based, climate-resilient planning in Los Angeles. She has been involved in water and land use policy for over 2 decades, bringing significant funding for and national attention to the LA River. We're very, very excited to have all of you here this evening. The format for this evening is relatively simple. Ahead of time, we've distributed some broad questions regarding the management and challenges facing California's water. And I'm simply going to go and ask each panelist to address these questions in about 2 minutes apiece to permit the opportunity for additional questions that may come up from the audience toward the end of our program. Let me at this point also hasten to add, do not run off after the program is complete. We are going to have a reception with food and refreshments in honor of our guests, and you'll have an additional opportunity to ask them questions about their work and about some of the issues that arise tonight. So let me begin with a fairly topical question. How might the results of our current elections, nationally and statewide, affect the future of California water policy? And let's begin with Mariela.
So this is a very interesting question. At the federal level, the way that we perceive that there might be an effect in water funding for California, it could be regarding the Safety Drinking Water Act. There's a revolving fund that the Congress allocates funding for the various states. And so our concern is that based on the stand of California, regarding other issues, specifically immigration, that could potentially affect on how much funding the federal EPA or just the Congress might allocate funding for the safety drinking water. So that's definitely something that we're concerned of at the federal level. At the state level, regarding other issues that California does not agree with our current president-elect, that might take some attention regarding the efforts for water. And so that's another concern that we have at the state level. Another good thing is that we do have a lot of Democrats at the House and the Senate. They're the majority. So with that in mind, we might be able to continue to push forward efforts to conserve water, which I think that's a good thing from the results of the elections.
Thank you. Michael.
So my focus has really been on the Colorado River Basin, stretching down into Southern California, because of a fair amount of the water that comes into Southern California, including here in Irvine, comes from the Colorado River. I'm, I guess, a little reluctant to make any forecasts about future events because my forecast for the election didn't quite pan out. So, but I think there's a lot of uncertainty. I think, well, let me put it that way, that we simply don't know how the new administration is going to alter, if at all, Colorado River policy. So there's a book that came out recently by John Fleck called Water is Fighting Over, and the title there is ironic because his thesis essentially is that water management in the Colorado River Basin has been driven primarily by cooperation. And that cooperation has primarily come from state actors and sub-state actors, so that local agencies and the state governments have come together and essentially policy drive, or consensus drives policy in the Colorado River. And typically the federal government comes in and provides some financial support when new decisions are made and helps shepherd the process, but the federal government has not been a taskmaster driving the final result of these policy processes. So we're not sure how this might change given the new administration and how that would affect water availability in Southern California coming from the Colorado River. One thing to keep in mind is that Colorado River rights in Southern California are very senior. Under current shortage guidelines, Arizona and Nevada take significant reductions, and now Mexico takes significant reductions before any reductions at all occur in Southern California. So even though Lake Mead is dropping at a pretty rapid clip, at least for the next 5 years or so, water draw from the Colorado River for Southern California is pretty assured. But there's a new discussion going on because concerns from Arizona, Nevada, and Mexico indirectly that the rapid decline in elevations at Lake Mead means that they're going to lose water quickly. So there's been something called the drought contingency planning process. And Arizona in particular has been looking to the federal government to help smooth some of that transition. So what happens now? Again, we don't know. The two senators from Arizona were not necessarily strong supporters of the president-elect and how that plays out. again, we don't know. It may be that there's less money that's going to flow from the federal government to Arizona and the Colorado River Basin generally, but considerable uncertainty there. So I guess my quick summary is water in Southern California coming from the Colorado River, which has helped California generally weather the recent drought, is relatively secure, but 5-6 years in the future, there's considerable uncertainty as if mead continues to drop, how that will affect Southern California.
Thank you. Kim?
So let me start with the good news. California, as I think we all know, went with a very progressive approach and actually has delivered a supermajority for Democrats in the Assembly and the Senate. Whether or not that means that all most wonderful things in the world will get passed it really remains to be seen, because it's hard to know how moderate Democrats are going to vote. But for the most part, I think in terms of state policy is concerned, it's good news in terms of moving progressive water policy. So there's discussion about potentially another state water bond moving forward in the next for the next 2018 ballot. That there may be some additional funding, hopefully, for regional water supply and more water reuse and stormwater. I think there's some discussion about maybe moving forward with some stormwater legislation and funding for stormwater, because that's a very important thing here in Southern California in particular. So I think that from the state perspective, California, unlike the federal side, we're poised to continue to move forward with very forward-thinking progressive policy. So that's good. On the federal side, it's unclear who's going to be appointed as our Secretary of Interior, and therefore also heading up the Bureau of Reclamation. All signs point to not terribly progressive folks, and in fact, if anything, my organization, I work up in Sacramento, but we're based in Washington, D.C., we're pretty much girding ourselves for some significant battles. We expect that the Clean Water Act rule that the EPA has put forward to protect wetlands will probably be repealed. And we'll be starting from scratch from there. So there will be a lot of pressure being placed on the state of California and the State Water Board to step up and fill the gaps in wetlands protection left by probably the EPA and Army Corps abrogating their responsibilities from the leadership perspective. I'm sure folks in the staff level probably aren't going to be excited about that. As far as the Congress is concerned, I do a lot of work in the Delta as well as with the Salton Sea. We expect that there'll be drought legislation being pushed forward pretty aggressively to essentially legislate how we operate our federal water project. And the federal water project is water that's captured up in Lake Shasta, comes down the Sacramento River, water that's captured on the San Joaquin comes down through the San Joaquin River. It all funnels over. Some of it gets sent down here into Southern California. That's a very simple way of putting it. But we expect that Congress may legislate how that's operated instead of having the Endangered Species and Clean Water Act rules apply, which will probably send more water to agriculture in southern San Joaquin Valley and potentially into Southern California. It'll be very bad for the species, the fish, particularly Delta smelt and winter run salmon. Winter run salmon, just FYI, with respect to the drought, they run in 3-year runs. We lost 2 years of runs. We have 1 year of runs left this year. And Delta smelt, which is an indicator species in the Delta of how the Delta is doing. It's sort of like the canary in the coal mine. And it's in extreme peril at this point, potentially will go extinct within decades or a decade, or maybe next year. We have no idea. There's so few of them left. So I think that federal water policy is not going to go so well. A lot of pressure is going to be put on the state to step up and be that green wall, so to speak, and protecting water quality and threatened and endangered species.
Thank you. Garry?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I've I hate to start with the federal level first, but I think that's where our most serious concern is. I think the first federal act that will be attacked will be the Endangered Species Act. There's examples of it across the country where big polluting industries have found that an obstacle, and certainly in California, it's been the butt of a lot of criticism, the Delta smelt, and trying to protect that. I think down the road, I think the Clean Water Act will be gutted. A couple of years ago, there was giving protections to waterways and farmland, and the farm lobby has been very much opposed to that and feel it was an overstep. And so I think once they open the Clean Water Act, there's a lot of things that they'll try to attack. Our organization, we kind of over the years have replaced in many ways the regional water quality control boards in the enforcement. We do several 100% more enforcement actions than they do. With budget cuts and constraints, they do less, we do more. All of ours are federal enforcement actions in federal court. We use the Clean Water Act as the basis, the legal basis for that. And if that little provision in the Clean Water Act gets taken out that allows third parties to enforce Clean Water Act when government fails to, that will severely change our world. I think the good news on the state level is I got a cartoon in the email, and it was a joint statement by the legislative leaders, and it was dated November 9th of this month. And basically, it's a cartoon, and it says, California was not part of the nation when its history began, but it is clearly now the keeper of its future. And I think that's in a way profound, because California does lead the nation in so many things, and particularly water. So many of the things that now has been adopted throughout the country is got its infancy here, and certainly one of the tracks we're on now with groundwater replenishment, or toilet to tap in a more crude sense, but that's a whole new arena, and it was started here in Orange County on the first major level, and now we're taking it to the next level, and maybe later in the program we'll have an opportunity to talk about that. But I think the election is going to have profound impacts. I'm glad we live in California, because I think California can compensate for damage done on the federal level, and that's certainly what we'll be pushing for.
Thank you. Melanie.
Yeah. I'm not as optimistic as some on the federal side here, and even on the state side. My understanding, as I've been tracking it, and probably too obsessively, is that on the climate side of things, which impacts water and everything else we're dealing with here, it's going to be a full-out reversal on all progress that was made, and an aggressive attack. That impacts everything and makes the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, Endangered Species Act, land use decisions, everything that we've been working hard to make successes on, small accruals of successes in the last 20 years that have been very hard fought, are going to be very vehemently attacked in rapid succession, and it's going to be difficult with respect to how that impacts water, and specifically the Clean Water Act in particular. Keepers are going to be busy. NRDC and the keepers and others have been fighting the local battles. And when you say we're good regionally here, statewide, look, people who implement water policy and projects and programs in Los Angeles, which is supposed to be so progressive, have fallen back on opportunities at the federal attacks against the Clean Water Act and loopholes against the Clean Water Act for the last 20 years to try to not move forward on things. So we had just reached a point where it looked like they were going to go, okay, fine, we're out of lawsuits after 20 years. Fine, now what do we do? And now we have the opportunity for them to say, maybe we don't have to do all this stuff. Maybe we can just go back. Maybe our liability is absolved. That's terrifying. On the ground, that's terrifying for all the work that we do here. And so that's a rough one. The policy we've been making here locally is extraordinary. Felicia Marcus at the State Board, God bless that appointment, God bless her. She has made tremendous strides, and her attention to detail is extraordinary. And that has meant that we have made much bigger steps towards progressive, sustainable, climate-resilient solutions than I've ever seen under anyone in such a short period of time. So we are blessed with that runway. But if we get pushback from local jurisdictions because of the fallback and the excuses, we're in trouble. And that doesn't even begin to look at the impact to how the Clean Air Act pushes up against water programs that we're doing and land use efforts. ESA and other things with EIRs that you may put together locally, that you may fight against something, that's now not going to happen. We're going to streamline the EIR. Sorry. It's terrifying. So at a moment just when we were really reaching a tipping point and people are beginning to acknowledge, many people not in our field, regular folk are beginning to understand and acknowledge that climate change is real. The drought is not something that's going to end anytime soon. There are things individuals can do. There are policy decisions we can push for. And just as the momentum is building, we're up against it. And it's going to be, I think, really incumbent upon individuals to speak out and speak up and demand. Because your electeds respond to that. And the appointeds do ultimately respond to the electeds. And you even don't rely on how progressive California is. Take that as some measure of buffer, but you must be vocal. You must, if we're going to succeed.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all the panelists for a very far-sighted and sobering analysis of where we might be headed. So, I've asked you to put on a predictive hat. For our second question, I'm going to ask you to put on a more prescriptive one. And my next question is, what must we do to ensure reliability, sustainability, quality, and equity for California's water? And what should our immediate steps be? Mariela, let's begin with you.
So I guess I want to start giving a little bit more background as to where I work. And so I'm not sure if you are familiar with the Eastern Coachella Valley. Some of you might be familiar with Stagecoach and Coachella Fest, which are two concerts that go on in the Coachella Valley that a lot of people are familiar with. But unfortunately, I'm not talking about that part of town. I'm talking about the eastern side, which is close to the Salton Sea, where is the location where there's a lot of different environmental factors that are causing this community to be severely disadvantaged. And water access is one of them. So how do we ensure that this community gets quality water? It definitely has to be, we have to make the politicians reliable for it. So we talked about being a voice for your community. In unincorporated communities like the Eastern Coachella Valley, the Riverside County is the jurisdiction that oversees everything that goes on there. So considering that it's a county, there's not much, a lot of the times there's not much attention that goes to the unincorporated communities. So a lot of the times these communities are overseen. And so one of the things that we could potentially push for is to require for land use and water to be part of the general plan. And that's definitely something that needs to be planned for. One of the things that we always see with unincorporated communities is that new development comes, but they always come to the incorporated communities. They don't come to the unincorporated communities. And one of the issues that we're currently having is that there is no access to potable or sanitation water. So one of the things that we need to hold our political folks accountable is that whenever there's new development, we want to make sure that we invest on these communities that lack the infrastructure. It's a way that we're going to make sure that these communities are sustainable, and currently a lot of them are dependent on wells, and a lot of the times they're contaminated. So definitely land use and integrating into the general plan, that's one of the ways that we could make it reliable. Regarding equity, we need to ensure that, again, we are investing in these communities. Unfortunately, a lot of the water in the state of California, a lot of it goes to agriculture. And so the community in the eastern Coachella Valley, a lot of them are farm workers. And so how do we ensure that there is a balance between the water that's being allocated for agriculture, but is also being allocated for these folks that work in agriculture? It's not fair and equitable that farmers are getting quantities of water, and the workers that work on these farms, they don't have access to quality water. So it's like, how do we ensure that where investments are going and where this water is going to humans? And yes, we need agriculture because that's a big aspect of our economy, but we need to make sure that at the end of the day, we're ensuring that these communities are getting quality water. Yeah.
Thank you, Mariela. Michael.
So I'm going to touch on municipal or residential water first, and then talk a little bit about agricultural water that Mariela just brought up. So one of the, I guess, unsung stories of water use in cities is that per capita demand has gone down dramatically. We saw part of this recently with the most recent drought and the requirements for conservation. And in fact, in many communities, conservation exceeded the targets. So overall, there was something like 23% reduction year over year in total water use in Southern California and most of the state because of the drought. But the idea that somehow year over year people could reduce their water use by 23% was really refuted in advance by many of these water agencies that said that there's no way they could reduce demand that much, that most of this demand was already hardened. And then frankly, it just exceeded the potential, and they all fought pretty hard against Felicia and others at the state board, saying that this was too much to take on. But in fact, people rose up. And one of the good things about this drought is that people started to recognize the shortage of water and availability of water and responded pretty quickly. And some of that behavior has maintained itself, that water use continues to be down now from what it had been prior to the drought. So that even though these drought restrictions have gone away, people continue to use less water than they were using prior to the drought. So we did a report with a very catchy title of Municipal Deliveries of Colorado River Water to point out that in many cities, there's been a decoupling of growth from water demand. So Metropolitan Water District, which provides water for all of you, some 19 million people in Southern California, grew by millions of people, but used less total water over a period of 20 years. So we've seen this, essentially this graph, if you will, this growth. Economic growth continues, population growth continues, but water use, not just per capita, but total water use goes down. And that means there's less pressure on these water agencies to invest in new dams or acquiring new supplies, which is a huge benefit. So often there's pressure because these water agencies have to maintain their budgets. They have operations and maintenance that they have to continue to pay for, and there's often a little bit of, there's often considerable pushback when people start raising, or when the agencies have to raise rates to continue to cover and in fact increase the rates because people are using less water. So they have this weird business model where they're being charged to get their customers to buy less water. But at the end of the day, they have to balance their sheets. So that means that all these people that are doing a good job of using less water are seeing their rates go up. which is a weird price incentive. And there's additional frustration because sometimes they see, or people are pushing back against what they see as additional development. So they're saying, why should I conserve water when they're just going to go ahead and sell water to new developments? But the benefit is, by conserving water, we're keeping that water and spreading that water, the same amount or less water being taken out of rivers, being taken out of Northern California or the Colorado River Basin to meet growth. So this was an idea that everybody refuted previously, but what we're seeing is that there's a tremendous ability to meet this call to reduce water use. And now, of course, the water agencies are saying, well, we did it. We did as much as we could, and we can't do any more. But Pacific Institute and other organizations have pointed out that in many communities throughout the world, Australia, Israel, and other water-stressed communities, per capita water use is often a third of the very good rates achieved in many parts of Southern California. And then you have other parts of the Colorado River Basin where water use is 3 to 4 times higher than that already. So I would say great job, Southern California, in reducing your water demand. You still have a ways to go. But one of the other ways that water use has remained relatively flat is that there's been essentially transfers of water. And this gets to the question of agriculture. So agriculture has historic rights to water and has used 70% or more of water supply statewide in the Colorado River Basin. And people are starting to say, well, why do we need all this water? Look at all this water that are applying to farm fields when we can generate 1,000 or 10,000 times as much revenue per unit water in a city by sending it to industry or building houses or whatever economic development might be occurring in the city versus what they can generate on a farm. But this raises significant equity questions. So largest water transfer in the country moves water from Imperial Valley, which has the single largest water right in the Colorado River, to Southern California, to San Diego. That water helped San Diego weather the most recent drought. But it's caused dramatic impacts and will cause even more dramatic impacts in coming years to the people around the Salton Sea, because as the Salton Sea recedes, as Imperial Irrigation District becomes more and more efficient, less water flows into the Salton Sea shrinks, and what does that mean? More playa is exposed. This lake bed's exposed, which releases additional dust to an area that's already got bad air quality. So essentially the people of the Salton Sea Basin in Coachella and Imperial Valleys are being forced to bear the brunt of increased efficiency, which is always this economic good, increased efficiency in this essentially the area of origin to provide water for San Diego. So that's the trade-off. The state of California was supposed to come in and mitigate and eventually prevent this additional dust impacts, as well as the ecological impacts to the Salton Sea, which will also be dramatic and ultimately catastrophic. So there's the trade-off. And there's your real equity concern is, should the 650,000 people who will be directly impacted by these increased dust, as well as the millions of birds that use the Salton Sea, be forced to bear the brunt of this water transfer that benefits San Diego? San Diego is paid, per the contract, a fair amount of money to Imperial Irrigation District, and the state of California is supposed to backstop that deal. So we have this weird externality where the beneficiary of the transfer has met their obligations. The state of California, which was supposed to backstop the deal, has not. And the state of California essentially is all of us, or all of you, and to date has not met its obligations. So there's a real challenge. And what should our immediate steps be? Well, I would encourage all of you to take up Melanie's call to action, to lay on your representatives to get some action at the Salton Sea, because moving forward, we will see more and more water transfers in the state of California and throughout the West, because agriculture has a disproportionate share of water based on historical rights. And some of that water is going to move to this higher economic returns, but we need to make sure that those impacts are fully mitigated, that the people who are bearing the brunt of those impacts and the species that are bearing the brunt of those impacts are protected. And to date, that's not happened. And in large part, that's because the state of California sat back and said, not on our watch, as some future administration is going to have to deal with that. So your immediate step is call your local representatives and say, state of California, get to work.
Thank you, Michael. Kim?
All right. Well, I don't want to repeat, I think, some of the really good recommendations that folks have made with respect to the strange way that water districts fund, there's sort of disincentives for conservation, the fact that there's a lack of investment in water supply for disadvantaged communities. Mike's already talked about the Salton Sea. So what I would want to just focus on briefly is that we've got a couple of proceedings going on in front of the State Water Board right now about how much water should be left within the Sacramento and San Joaquin River and the California Delta, the Bay Delta. You know, it's an interesting thing because people don't understand that the way California's water system is the most highly regulated and altered water system. We have completely changed the hydrology in the state of California through dams and riprap and levees, and we move water around because 2/3 of the water that's generated is generated not where the population is. So we've engineered this whole system. The real result of it is that the Bay Delta is essentially operated in drought. The reason why we have so many species declining is because we don't deliver enough water down the rivers and out through underneath the Golden Gate Bridge to sustain the species. So we've been in 6 years of drought, but I would submit that the river systems have been in drought for decades. And we've seen the results of it. So I think that we need to start to significantly invest back into restoration of our disrupted river systems and into wetlands. And there's ways of doing that. There's ways that we can start to invest in green infrastructure. So what's going on with the LA River is really exciting because we've basically tried to engineer our way out of issues, but we've realized it's come full circle that Mother Nature actually has figured things out pretty darn well. There's a reason why rivers operate the way they operate. There's a reason why they meander. There's a reason why I have floodplains. And if we start to invest back into more of those types of natural systems, we can actually improve a lot of our water issues in terms of reducing flooding, better retention and restoration of groundwater, aquifers, and improved species. So what I would like to see is more investment in terms of the rules of how we operate our systems and also money going into restoration of those systems. And also, when we are looking at trying to generate water supply, more regional water supply reliability, looking more to the regions to be self-sufficient. So instead of having to move all the water from the northern part of the state down to the southern part of the state, making these other areas more regionally sufficient. So there's what we call conjunctive use, which is replenishing groundwater and then using that groundwater, cleaning up groundwater so we can use it. The other thing that we're going to have to work on actually is forest management. You guys are here in Southern California, but if you go up to the Sierra Nevada, we have a horrible problem with the drought and the way we've operated our forests. We've got massive tree die-off. This is going to cause real problems because a lot of the snowpack and the water that we use are generated in the Sierra Nevada. So how we manage those forest watersheds are critical for all of us downstream. And then the last thing I would just say is, let's see, there's something else. I've totally lost my train of thought. There's forest management, and I'll come to it when I think of it when we answer other questions. But those are just some of the things that we have to there's something about water, well, I forget. Anyways, those are just a few of the recommendations in addition to the good recommendations previously made.
Thank you, Kim. Gary.
I think I want to take two different tracks. One is I think Southern California has got to become far more water resilient and sustainable than we are now. And we've been advocating for a number of years, kind of a way to get there. And one of the most foolish things we do is landscape the way we do. We're putting 60% of our potable water on our landscapes to pretend we're not in an arid climate. And so, I think that comes home to all of us. We all have to get that message, and we have to change our behavior. And there's plenty of information. We have a 2.5 acre garden at Rancho San Diego College that has 6 different backyards that just promote how do you change, how do you get a landscape that's colorful but drought tolerant. You know, we need to restore our aquifers. If we restored the aquifers we have in Southern California, particularly in the San Fernando Valley, that'd give us 13 million acre feet more of water storage. So when we do have rain, we can store it and not put it out in the ocean. We also, you know, you're going to hear a lot of repetitive things because we probably all agree. And you know, conservation. In the last year and a half, we saw conservation savings of 25, 27, 28%. You know, and nobody's life changed. Nobody was really inconvenienced. And we saved that much water. And that's an incredible amount. And even though we lobbied for continued drought regulation, there were a lot of forces on that, particularly water districts who wanted to sell desal water. You know, they want to sell more water. And so, you know, it's a conundrum that we've got to deal with. Another thing that Orange County's been particularly innovative in is, I mentioned it earlier, toilet to tap. And I've got to train myself to quit using that term.
Yeah.
Because it's totally the wrong term. And so what we did is created what we call the groundwater replenishment system. We originally, and the plant was opened in 2008. I served on the oversight panel of it from 2004 till last year. And what we do is take a little over 100 million gallons a day and we put it through 5 barriers of treatment, and we wind up with almost distilled water. And we take that water and we put it in an aquifer. One lucky thing about Orange County is we sit on a not large, not giant, but just totally immense aquifer. It's estimated to be 55 to 60 million acre feet, which would be about the size of Lake Mead when there's water in it. And so, you know, we're fortunate that way, and we take this water, and so there's no crisis, there's no health risk. We take it and we put it in the aquifer. Then it's pumped up later and goes into the drinking water system. That whole thing is called indirect potable reuse. And what we're trying to do is go to the next level. Because if you just stay with indirect potable, you have to be on an aquifer or near a lake to use it. And so direct potable is the next step. And the legislature of California had the foresight to try to push this forward. They passed 2 Senate bills, and they created an advisory panel and an expert panel. And for the last 2.5 years, I've chaired the statewide advisory panel. And we just came up with our recommendations a month and a half ago, had an afternoon presentation to the state board, both the expert panel and the advisory panel, saying that direct potable reuse is feasible, and let's invest the money to get there. There's 6 different scientific gaps we've got to fill, but they're all fillable, and we can write criteria and regulations while we're doing that. But if we get to a point of direct potable reuse, that means it's applicable most anywhere, with the exception that it's expensive and you better be a water district that has the resources and the capacity to do it. But you're going to see California moving and leading the nation, leading the world, basically, in that area. And that, again, is something that's going to be a water source that is reusable, and it's silly because we basically use water once, and then we discharge it to a river, to the ocean, and you know, we can get more uses, and we've proven it's safe and reliable. And so, you know, there's a lot of good things. There's a lot of good science, and the things I said we need to do, I wish more money would be put to them. I wish it'd be more aggressive. I wish a lot of things, but the whole thing is that everything I've mentioned we're doing. You know, it's acknowledged that we're going in that direction. I'd like more money to restore aquifers. You know, I'd like more money to be out there to encourage people and give them a motivation to transition their landscapes. There's a lot we can do, and we're doing it. I'd like it just to go faster, because it needs to go faster, and have more of a commitment from local government and from, our regional governments. But that's kind of my answer on where we're going.
Thank you, Garry. Melanie?
A lot of good stuff. Agree with what's been said, and see if I can give you my slant on things. I'll try to go through the 4 issues here: reliability, sustainability, quality, and equity. Reliability, it's a word that's been thrown around a lot in the last couple of years as the reason why we need the twin tunnels. Reliability. Y'all know, because you're working in water, 19% of our state's total electricity use and 32% of our natural gas use and our carbon footprint that's attached to that goes to moving water around the state and treating it. Y'all may or may not know that engineers don't often admit, although some have come out and made very poignant statements about it, that built systems will fail. All built systems will fail, right? Particularly levees. The state's flood control engineer 100 years ago made a really good statement about that. It's like, it's not will they fail, it's just when. They're going to fail, and that could be catastrophic. Engineered systems require a lot of maintenance, and they are going to fail. They have a shelf life. Nature, on the other hand, is regenerative. It's a question of making those compacts and those agreements to work within those parameters. It's more cost effective, the co-benefits are off the charts. So these are the kind of investments we need to make moving forward. On reliability, if you want a system that's going to continue to work, then you do a nature-based system. It's going to cost you less in carbon and in money and in O&M than an engineered solution. Technology is not the silver bullet when it comes to water. Nature-based solutions are. Local reliability, regional and local supply, localizing our supply, watershed by watershed, region by region, focusing on that as opportunities are available. San Diego is in a bit more of a challenge than Orange County and Los Angeles. They don't have the aquifers that we do. So they're going to have to focus more on DPR and indirect potable use, and landscape transformation and a higher conservation target. But those of us who have these aquifers, that's our focus has to be in getting that stormwater to groundwater. Even in a drought year, we get a good amount of water that we are throwing away. We got to poke holes in that hardscape. We got to work with nature. We have to transition. We're even with reclaimed water supplies, we have been doing massive treatment plants, and we need to make smaller scale distributed systems in our food supply, in our water supply, in our packaged plants rather than big plants, right? That makes them more reliable. So smaller scale, nature-based solutions. These concepts are not comfortable for the water purveyors, who pretty much run the show on where investments go. And the State Water Board can push and push, but Met is going to push back harder. They're not ready to go there yet. They're still in denial. And they haven't figured out how to transform their business model. And it's a really, really tough fight. So reliability and sustainability, local distributed systems, diversified portfolios, it goes from smaller and more distributed reclaimed water plants to what you're doing in your yard, as Jerry said. And we've been working on what we call urban acupuncture for the last 5 years. So lots of small scale changes, right? What can you do in your yard? You can put in a rain tank. You can do some rain grading. You can install a gray water system. You can do an infiltration trench. You can do a stormwater basin in your parkway to help capture street runoff. You've got to get rid of your lawn and do climate appropriate plantings. You do that, you start to have a better relationship with water. Your conservation goes fantastic. All of our project participants are under 55 gallons per capita per day. And this was before the regs kicked in. And we should get down to 40. But it requires that relationship, as opposed to set it and forget it, which has been the mantra of the water agencies for ever so long. We need to reconnect to where our water comes from. And if you have that awareness, you improve the water quality as well. You understand that your water quality is never going to be adequate if you have concrete channels and you have land use that doesn't foster that, right? If you have a real living river system, that helps you clean up your water supply, it helps you hang on to your local water, you have a different relationship to what your local water is, that relates to your drinking water supplies, and your behaviors change, and your land use decisions change. So reliability, sustainability, quality, and equity. We have a great tool right now with CalEnviroScreen to help us focus our investments, and a lot of grant funds in Prop 1 require that you focus your investments in disadvantaged communities and climate vulnerable communities, and that's awesome. But we have to make sure that we are doing remedial work on some of the factors that aren't captured in that CalEnviroScreen. Existing impacts, both on air quality and water quality in communities that have been historically disadvantaged and been dumped upon, right? And that includes cleaning up groundwater and land. Contaminated land, because if we're going to be capturing our stormwater and getting it to groundwater or using those soils to capture carbon and hang on to our water, those soils had better be clean as well. So we need to be thoughtful on a wide range of topics. This is not something that our educational system has trained us to do, because it's training us to take a job in the workforce, and those are very siloed positions. It is a challenge for agencies, some of them who actually are thinking about doing this, not many are, but some who are thinking about looking for people who have a diversified background. An environmental specialist, if you will, rather than simply an engineer. You need that mindset of being able to look at how your proposals are going to impact social, environmental, all the different factors, and be able to work collaboratively. And it's not something that we have been doing for very long. We're in a nascent period with that. It is critical to work collaboratively across disciplines if we're going to make this work. So that's a super important thing with equity, and I think that's all for. I do want to say one thing about, we've made some great advancements on federal, I hope this flies under the radar there, but we've made some great executive actions and some other policy motions with respect to flood and climate catastrophes. And FEMA and the beleaguered, if you're not all aware, you're aware, you will be soon, FEMA insurance industry, that you cannot continue to be made whole again after a flood disaster. Those homeowners who have been made whole 6 or 7 times because they want to live where they live, that's going to come to an end. The prioritization for nature-based solutions is increasing in federal policy for using non-structural solutions for wetlands, and the wetlands phrase is emphasized so strongly. It's awesome, but the floodplain piece, somebody at NRDC said, "Oh well, it's assumed." I'm like, no, it's not. The floodplain piece is a huge part of it. So there are encouragements and incentives to move these federal agencies to focus on those kind of nature-based solutions, and that's encouraging. I hope those little bits fly under the new administration's radar, and we can actually move forward on them. Building codes are a big piece of this. Don't forget, we've built our cities to do these things, to throw our water away. So even the property you live on is designed to have a 2% slope, to throw it into the gutter and out to the sea, right? So in order to change that, it requires that dozens of pieces of your local building code have got to be tweaked to encourage managing stormwater on site. Every individual property needs to be able to manage stormwater on site, capture it, harvest it for reuse, keep it from becoming runoff, both for water quality and also for water supply, help us infiltrate it to the groundwater basin, do your own local direct potable or indirect potable reuse at home. There you go.
Excellent. I want to thank you, Melanie, for segueing to our next question indirectly, as you're going to see just a moment. And I want to thank all the panelists for very incisive and thought-provoking recommendations that I hope, and I think we all hope, our policymakers hear and listen to. One of our aspirations here at the University of California is the education of future water leaders. And that is one of our great aspirations and one of our great hopes. One of our audience members has posed a very interesting question, which I want to tag off of and expand just a little bit, and ask all of you to respond to. and that is simply, how did you decide on a career in a nonprofit, specifically around water, and what do you find most rewarding and most challenging about your work? Let's begin here.
So after graduating from college, I majored in biology, wanted to go to medical school. I started doubting whether medicine was something that I wanted to pursue. And so through working through Leadership Council, I'm exposed to what I call the root causes of people getting sick. It's the other side that a lot of the times is overseen. And that's the main reason why I wanted to join Leadership Council, because it gave me a different perspective about why are people getting sick, and a better perspective of how can, in the future, can I be a better health provider. And so in Leadership Council, we also focus on access to transportation, affordable housing, and environmental justice, and water access is one of the components. So one of the challenges that I've experienced is that when trying to advocate for communities, specifically disadvantaged communities, a lot of the times you come across barriers of political leaders who might not share the same opinions about where investment should be going to. You come across, for me, what was very challenging is to realize that I was not going to be seeing change in a month, in 2 months. That it was going to take small steps, and that I needed to make sure that I embraced every step of the way. Because if not, I was going to lose hope and faith that things were going to get done. I mean, one of the biggest rewards, I think, it's being able to be an advocate for my community. My parents are farm workers, and so being able to give back to the farm working community and being able to voice their needs on a daily basis, whether they have access to water, whether they have, currently right now it's getting cold, so a lot of them live in mobile home parks where the trailer gets cold and they have a hard time going to sleep, even though they have 5 blankets over their body, right? So it's like, it's very rewarding to be able to give back to my community, but also being able to expand my understanding of what holistic health means. I would definitely suggest for all of you to consider, especially undergrads, to consider working in nonprofits, because it gives you a different perspective of what's causing people to get sick, or how can you expand or think more innovatively, how can you use your skills of an engineer, or all the different subjects that you covered in undergrad. I feel like that gives you a background so that you could then take it to the next level and think innovatively as to what impact can you give back to your community or just to society as a whole.
Thank you, Mariela.
So I went to grad school and I was interested in environmental work, and I thought my entree into environmental work was recycling. It was a small step, I admit, but my thesis advisor said, don't do recycling, look at water. And she said, you should read Cadillac Desert. So I read Cadillac Desert.
We all have.
Now I work in water. Because if you haven't read Cadillac Desert, you should read Cadillac Desert. So I had a policy background, and frankly, to my mind, water essentially incorporates all these different aspects. It's all about power, it's about politics, it's about law, it's about ecosystems, the environment generally, it's about human behavior, what we can do to make this a better planet, and how we relate to water and recognize the availability and supply of water and react to that. To me, it's endlessly fascinating. Not endlessly rewarding. I've had I guess my most rewarding project, I work with, or interested Bureau of Reclamation in trying a different approach to ecosystem restoration as part of the multi-species conservation program on the Colorado River. Came up with this idea, actually found somebody to at least fund the general concept. And so now there's something called the Laguna Restoration Site on the lower Colorado River, which is a 1,200-acre restoration site, which is very different from all the other MSCP sites. And I like to think I played a part in that, and that's helps buffer my incredible frustration with the Salton Sea, which I've been working on for far too long, and is endlessly challenging and frustrating. And I think the bigger challenge is, in the back of my mind, I think, well, we're making some progress, and the arc of history tends towards justice and all that, and so I'm still not quite reconciled to what happened a few weeks ago. So ask me in a few months, and maybe I'll get my feedback on the ground, but I'm still feeling challenged.
Thank you, Michael. Kim.
So I like to credit my dad with why I do the work that I do, because he used to take me fishing up in the Sierra Nevadas. He had this old Jeep, and he's a fly fisherman. And like, he's one of those crazy fly fishermen who ties his own flies, and it's very serious business for him. But he would load up the Jeep, and he would bring me along. I started off just hauling his tackle box and other stuff, and then finally I started fishing myself, and I've fished up and down the state. And and that's when my love of the environment really started, was that. So when I went to another UC Davis, and I wanted to do environmental policy work, and I actually saw this woman speak about mountain lions, and that got my interest in wildlife. So I actually didn't start off working on water. I actually started off working on endangered species protection, because that captured my interest. But very quickly, you will get into water. You cannot work in the environmental arena and not find yourself working on water. And I, of course, read Cadillac Desert, which I do highly recommend for folks. Ironically enough, though, Mark Reisner, who wrote that book, had a sort of change of heart in terms of his relationship with agriculture, which is a little ironic twist there. There's a lot of, but the point that Mike was making about the water is a fascinating subject, because you need it to live. We are mostly water. It is related to everything, economics and politics, and it's a fascinating story. And some of the greatest battles have been fought over water, which is why you hear the old adage of whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. It's very true. And so I find it to be a fascinating subject. And like I said, I work on endangered species, and a lot of the endangered species issues are caught up with how we use or misuse water, which reminded me of what a point I wanted to make earlier about, and we haven't touched on this. One of the things I think it's really important to work on land use policy and how water consumption in a suburban and urban setting. We did not talk about agriculture that much. Agriculture does consume somewhere along the lines of about 70% of water. We have very odd policies when it comes to agriculture. We are farming in areas that frankly we should not be farming in, on lands that frankly we should not be farming any longer. We have salt-laden and selenium-laden lands on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley that, only because we provide water so cheaply to those junior irrigators that they're able to make money. Interestingly enough, agriculture in this last drought had made more money last year than they've ever made before, generally speaking. So I do think, and this is kind of this is maybe crazy, but I think we should be seriously looking at retiring agriculture, about 1 million acres of agriculture. If we want to get real about how we're using water in the state of California relative to population growth and what we really need to provide to species, we are over farming. To a degree we have pistachio trees in Indian Wells Valley that is causing people to not have potable water to drink. Our policies are completely backwards, and we should be looking at figuring out how to transition ourselves off of some of these agricultural lands that we should not be farming on. And so I kind of added that in there in terms of why I work on this, because it reminded me about Mark Reisner. But I think that's one of my frustrations is that we have very backwards policies, and we aren't getting real about agriculture because sometimes it's considered sort of the third rail. Nobody wants to talk about it. But I think that unless we really address what our policies are, we're not going to be able to manage ourselves, because we're very efficient in the urban and suburban, and certainly we can be more efficient. But agriculture is what's driving a lot of the problems that we're seeing in terms of endangered species and how we're using our water. As far as positives, I mean, I guess the reason I have not had the kind of success Mike's had in terms of Laguna Salada. And so I would just say you have to be very patient in water. Some of the issues I've been working on, like for example, trying to get the State Water Board to pass a wetlands policy, it's been a decade working on it. We have yet to pass that policy. Hopefully now we will, because we're gonna lose the Clean Water Act rule. Salt and Sea, I've been working on it for 13 years. So I think to do the type of work that you do here, you have to be unbelievably stubborn and unbelievably optimistic. A bizarre combination of Pollyanna and I don't know what, Sisyphus. So that would be my recommendation. And I really encourage people to move into the water arena, because as far as I'm concerned, the two major drivers moving forward for us is going to be water and energy. And we need really forward-thinking and creative people if we're going to be able to manage ourselves into the future. So.
Thank you, Kim. Gary?
I have a little different story. When I got out of college, I went to the University of Redlands, and when I got out of school, I went into city government. It was an assistant city manager and a city manager, and found all kinds of issues with that, and got involved in trade groups and lobbying in Sacramento, and started a couple of businesses, was a Chamber of Commerce president twice, and basically, I'm a native of Orange County. I grew up here. I love the ocean, and I have wonderful memories of things I did growing up here in Orange County. It was everybody, all the hamburger stands had abalone shells as ashtrays. People had so many abalones that they would put them in their gardens. They're too pretty to throw away, but had no intrinsic value. Our neighbor had so many of them, he embedded them in the wall around his yard. I remember going to Newport, the 41st Street and around there, and we had this metal pitchfork that hung in the garage, and it was like a pitchfork and then bent over. And we would take that once a year, and my father and I would go out, walk out on the beach, and you would dig for burrowing clams. And they were about that size, and I had the job of pulling them in a gunny sack across the beach. And that's when I thought our beaches here were like a mile deep. And I'd go home and watch him, shuck them and the clams. You could go to the pier when I was in junior high, and you could pull up as many bonita as you wanted to from the pier, and have a good fight and pull them up. And people said they weren't that great to eat, but anyhow, there was a lot of it. And then as I went to school and did different things, I always was close to Orange County, and then I started seeing posted and closed beaches when I went there, and I looked at NRDC report in the early and mid 90s. They had an annual report, and I looked at how many beaches were either closed or posted in just our 42-mile coastline. In 1999, it was 1,365. And so, I like a typical adult was saying, damn it, why doesn't somebody do something about it? And nobody was. And so finally it dawned on me, well, okay, I will. And so I basically got good advice from friends, and Terry Tamminen, who was the Santa Monica Baykeeper, who became Secretary of Cal EPA, and he and Arnold went on to do an international road show on climate change. And Terry gave me advice and helped me start Orange County, Coastkeeper. And I said, I don't want this to be a P.O. box and an answering machine and a bunch of volunteers at night and on weekends. I want this to be a professional staff of PhDs and master's degrees, and I want professionals. And we have to interact with government, and government operates from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, not at nights and on weekends. And so I remember in Orange County starting it, and I had some very influential, well-known people say, are you kidding? A full-time environmental organization in Orange County? And I went around the first couple of years in speeches and would say, I'm teaching Orange County how to spell the word environment, and we're on the letter O right now. and so, you know, our whole point was it's okay to talk about water quality. It's okay to talk about the issues we talk about, and that doesn't mean you have tree hugger branded on your head. It's a legitimate conversation for all of us to have. And we opened our doors March 1st, 1999. May 14th, AB 411 went into effect, and a few weeks later, Huntington Beach, Surf City, USA, was closed the entire summer because it couldn't meet water quality standards. And, you know, if somebody didn't have an environmental bone in their body, they understood economics. That cost $100 million. And government did what it does in a crisis, is throw money at it. And so they threw money to try to find out what happened. And after $4 or $5 million was spent, we found there was no smoking gun. It was a lot of non-point source pollution coming from a lot of places. And the great thing is it brought the subject here to everybody's dinner table. And so we started doing a number of things, and with the staff that we had, is we wanted to get in the back rooms and be a stakeholder and actually write the regulations. You were talking about development standards. 10 years ago, we got low impact development, which said you can no longer build every development and have gravity take all the runoff off the property. You've got to retain that water. You've got to percolate it, you've got to treat it or biofiltrate it, or a number of things. And the first time that we got it, it was suggested that developers consider it. Well, 5 or 6 years later, when it had to be renewed, we got it mandatory. It said, you know, may consider, we got to shall. And so here we have low impact development, and it's in all of our development regulations. The developers got to take responsibility for stormwater. And so, you know, it's a number of things that we've tried to do. We also do a lot of restoration. Orange County lost its kelp forest for 40, 45 years, and people didn't lose sleep over kelp. They did ask, we used to have great fishing here, what happened to it? Well, kelp is a habitat to 800 species of fish. So we learned how to grow it. We grew it in laboratories and took it out in line from the South Jetty of Newport to Dana Point with kelp, patches of kelp, hoping if we had good upwelling, it would take off. And it did. That's why of recent years, we have kelp forests in Laguna Beach again. We're doing eelgrass in Olympia oysters in Upper Newport and Alameda Space. And now we're putting them together to see if that would be a mitigation to stabilize the sediment against sea level rise. And so, you know, we've been able to do a lot of things in this area. And then at one point we realized, you know, Orange County's at the bottom of a hill and we need to go up. And I was at least smart enough to realize I couldn't export Orange County Coastkeeper to the Inland Empire. And so I created another organization called the Inland Empire Waterkeeper, and we have an office and a staff in Riverside doing very similar things, but different than what we do. And so, you know, we've had a number of successes, and I'm not about to talk to them about here, but it's gratifying, it's fulfilling. If you have a passion, and I would say passion is 80% of it. If you want to protect something, if you want to get into something, you know, don't worry about the degree, don't worry about a lot of things. Show your passion and you can build an organization and do something. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Garry. Melanie.
Well, that was a comforting segue. I didn't go to school. After all these, I went to UC this and I went to UC that. Not my master's degree. I didn't go to school. In fact, I didn't do anything related to the environment or water for the first half of my life, more than half of my life. I've been doing this for 20 years, but I'm old. My previous career was in the theater in New York. So what prompted me to do this was a few years of an interregnum between that and coming back to California to take care of my ailing parents. Being here without Broadway, and then looking at the changes that had happened in the 20 years I'd been gone, what we'd lost of the upper watershed, that we hadn't managed to put any public transportation in place, that we'd lost more open space throughout the region. After being in a city that functioned much differently, I was loath to be in California at all. And right after I came back, we had two back-to-back crises, both the second uprising in my life and the massive earthquake. And those things and the reaction to both of those things spurred me into social justice activism, working with two groups, the first being one that was closest to my experience called Women's Action Coalition, which was basically a lot of artists who were responding to political issues going on in a creative way to bring attention to them. And so you get to use the sort of let's put on a show thing and transition into learning about politics from a lot of folks who are working in nonprofits and bringing issues to the table, a variety of them that you get to engage on in a creative way. And then with the Bohemian Women's Political Alliance, whose motto was good politics, bad attitude, who was founded by a lot of the Exene Cervenka and other members of the punk movement. And we did a lot of good with both of those organizations, and I was working on a number of different issues, primarily women's health and social justice. And I managed to do some creative fundraising as a outgrowth of that, which got attention of some friends who put me in a position of doing some more of that. I will say that when I was in New York working in the theater, I used to have parties at my house a lot. People would come, someone introduced themselves, introduced their friend as someone who worked in a nonprofit. And I said, well, but then how do you make a living? Right? So I literally had no notion of what the nonprofit world was. And when someone offered me my first job doing fundraising for a nonprofit, I said, I couldn't possibly take money. It's a nonprofit. They're like, no. You're working. You will get paid. And I'm like, but how does that work, right? So I did my first fundraiser for Sunset Hall, which was a retirement home for basically old communists and socialists. Awesome people, amazing volunteer force. I learned from my friends who were doing fundraising for the ACLU and who were working for Justice for Janitors and were doing a lot of other things. And I was spread myself thin. I redid the organic garden at Tree People. I was everywhere all the time, and I was burning out. And I was going to leave Los Angeles and run away to Ojai. And a friend of mine said, well, please just meet this person who is married to a colleague of mine, and they need some fundraising. They need some guidance, and I think you can help them. So I went and met with them, and they were working on the Los Angeles River. And we had this meeting, and they said, we have $20 in the bank. And I'm like, uh-huh. And we're exhausted, and we just need someone to pick this up and run with it. And I said, well, here's my advice, and nice meeting you. And they hounded me, and they convinced me that I could do the work from Ojai. Turned out not to be true, but they wanted me to organize a cleanup, which turned into, you're awesome, please become our next executive director. And in the interim, I met a woman on my first day on the job named Dorothy Green, who founded Heal the Bay. And Dorothy had just started the Watershed Council. And my job on my very first day was to go to the Watershed Council and see who could give us some money for the cleanup. Well, I went to the Watershed Council and listened to Dorothy speak, and I went, oh, that's why I'm here. I did not understand what Friends of the Los Angeles River was after, even after meeting with their founder and their board. When I heard Dorothy speak, all the lights went off in my head, and I realized that water is the thing that connects us all, that the rivers, creeks, and streams are the conduit for that, that they connect all of these issues I was working on. They touch on everything, public health, social justice, environmental justice, everything, and that I would never be bored. If I was working on the river from a watershed management perspective, I would be working on every subject that interested me at all, and I would have a lifetime of ongoing education and opportunities to engage. Dorothy became my mentor, and I miss her every day. Carl Sagan said the two most important things in life are clean water and clean air, and enough of both of them. And everything else you're interested in comes after that. And I remind myself of that every day, and I tell someone that as often as I can, because we have made those things very unimportant in our modern society. And I think climate and the exigency that we're facing underscores that 100 times. So if you choose to work in water, you can work on a variety of things, from policy to community work to transportation to land use to species to just everything connects to this, and hopefully nature-based engineering. The rewarding moments for me, the most, have come on different scales. I sued the city of Los Angeles and the Union Pacific Railroad and the largest home developer in the country back in 2001, and won over a site on the Los Angeles River that was known as Taylor Yard and is now Rio Los Angeles State Park. Winning that felt good, but not nearly as good as opening day. We worked with a coalition of community organizations that I pulled together to fight for this site and to make the park happen and to be involved in its development. And the opening day was a surreal experience for me to see a severely underparked community in delirium as they walked around and enjoyed this park. In the rain, mind you. But the happiness, and for the, even now, but for especially the first few years, every time I would go, and just the sheer joy. And that to me is a tremendous, one of the biggest rewards so far. Another one is a small scale with the work we've been doing with Water LA, with the urban acupuncture, and connecting people to water by making these changes in their homes. One of them said to me that I had, by bringing this to them and walking this process and working side by side and having them make these changes, that it had relieved for them an existential dread. That climate was such an overwhelming thing that the la impulse is pretty strong in most of us. And it was a buzz in her head all the time, and she said, now that's been relieved because I have done something, and I will continue to do something that is going to contribute to making a difference, and it makes my neighbors make that change, and their neighbors make that change, and it's local, and it's real, and I'm empowered by that. That's incredibly rewarding. Lots of little policy things that you've got to grab and celebrate whenever they happen are huge, even though you're exhausted when they finally do. And the moments along the way. My strategy is kind of Chinese water torture. And I'm never sure, Peter could back me up on this. In meetings, I speak out a lot. And I'm doubtful that much of what I have said is heard. So the strategy is that I have someone else in the meeting who, no offense, is often male, who will then 5 minutes later reiterate it and rephrase it. So if I'm lucky, I've got that. If not, then 2 meetings later, it will have been picked up by other people in the room, and they can start a choir. And it's the Chinese water torture approach. So when you hit those watershed moments, and we had a moment last week in the One Water planning meeting where it happened, those are huge rewards. And it's hard to express them to someone else who's not as geeked out and not as committed and not as completely passionate about these things, because people who are like that are also completely exhausted and are constantly struggling with. Rebecca Solnit does great writing, by the way, on the difference between optimism and hope and pessimism and cynicism. If anybody works in environmental stuff, you're going to need it. Rebecca Solnit, especially these days, does great work on that. But so finding that balance is a part of it. But the rewards are there, and you have to remember them, and you have to cherish them. It is a slog, but they're awesome when they come. So if you do it out of passion, then those will be meaningful, very meaningful to you. Yeah, so there you go. Sorry.
No, thank you very much, Melanie. Wonderful way to end this. The enthusiasm with which all of you do what you do, the passion that you bring to your work, and the benefits that you have given all of us living in Southern California through your efforts are tremendous and I think infectious for our students and I know for the rest of us here. Before I thank our panelists, I want to take this moment to again invite you to our reception immediately following. Please introduce yourself to our panelists and continue the discussion. I want to thank Alyssa Sanchez from the Office of Academic Initiatives who helped plan this event. Shannon Robach, my postdoctoral researcher who basically makes sure that I know what I'm supposed to be doing each and every day in our initiative. And Victoria Lowerson Brito, who was instrumental in planning this particular event. Melanie, I'll get it. Mariela. Very good. Mariela, Michael, Kim, Garry, and Melanie, thank you very much. Let's give it up for them.